there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the SoFin podcast, part of the FinServe Marketing Podcast Network. This week on the show, I have Manu Smadja, the CEO and founder of MPOWER. Now, MPOWER is a really creative FinTech solution for international students because, as an American student, I was unaware of this. International students cannot get traditional student loans if they want to go to college here in America. They actually have to find other financing solutions, and oftentimes those aren't available until MPOWER came along. So really, really fascinating conversation. Amazing story, by the way, for Manu and his founder journey. You're absolutely going to love this one. Huge props to my friend Kelly for putting us together. She keeps throwing heat with the guests. Speaking of amazing FinTech founders that Kelly has introduced me to, Runik Mehrotra and Samir Vazvada, the founders of Vise, who have been on this show before and the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, are with us again on one of our newest shows on the network, the Augmented Advisor podcast, where we produce for Blue Leaf. Runik and Samir join myself and John Prendergast, the CEO of Blue Leaf, for a fantastic conversation about artificial intelligence-powered custom portfolios for individual clients of financial advisors. Fantastic conversation. You're absolutely going to love it. So make sure you check that out. And speaking of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, recently just had Kyle Simpson from FS Investments to talk about the FS Thrive program, which is a fantastic program for financial advisors to help them thrive at work, at home, and in their communities. Great conversation. By the way, the first in-person podcast that I've had in a couple of years, where Kyle was in the room with myself and Jeremy Carnell, the CEO of Truelytics. It was our awesome experience to be in the room recording a podcast with people again. Loved it. All right, let's get to the conversation with Manu Smadja of MPOWER. Manu, I'm excited to have you on the SoFin podcast. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mike. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
That's great. It's funny. We were talking about before we clicked go. It's hard to look this good and be this peppy all the time. But you and I were really putting the reps in and feeling great about things every day.
That's right. Definitely above average, as we tell our respective wives.
That's right. Exactly.
These buddies don't come easy. It's hard. It's hard to look this good every day.
Yeah. And you just let her know. Everybody
That's
appreciates you're welcome. Occasionally, you're welcome, honey. You're welcome. So, anyways. Hey, I wanted to dive into this because, Kelly and Colby put us together, and Kelly and Colby have introduced me to so many amazing FinTech entrepreneurs over the years. And so anytime they send somebody over, I'm like, I can't wait to meet this entrepreneur and learn more about this company. And I was fascinated to learn about MPOWER and your journey. And we talked a lot about it in prep, and I'm really excited to share it with our audience here. So I thought maybe we could start with kind of the quintessential elevator pitch. What is MPOWER and why is it important?
Sure. What are we about? So MPOWER, in a nutshell, is the leader in international student financing in North America. So it may sound a little fancy. What it means in practice is that we finance students coming from 180 countries around the planet, going to the top 400 schools in the US and Canada. So, and what you'd find at MPOWER is the glue that really binds our team of 100 or so people together is this mission of removing financial obstacles towards higher education for the bright minds around the planet.
That was great. That was perfect. I was like, I should have had a timer. You crushed it in the minute. I was like, oh, is he going to keep going? No, he's just like, boom, good, right? The bright minds around the planet. I love that. I mean, as somebody who didn't have a lot of money, from family money to go to finance school. And I'm an American, and I had to do, work while I was in college, and I had to take out a few student loans here and there. And then I was lucky enough to have some tuition reimbursement from employers. I absolutely understand the need for financing, right? That the college is expensive and it's only getting more and more expensive. I wonder if we could talk about your inspiration, if you will. In our prep call, you referred to yourself as an accidental entrepreneur, which is a fairly common component for founders and their origin stories. Are like, I wasn't planning on starting this company, but this thing hit me. Like I had this wave of an aha moment or whatever, this type of experience. So what was your accidental aha moment, if you will, that made you decide, I've got to make this thing happen?
Sure. And I feel like, so I'm an accidental entrepreneur, and I'm a dull one at that, because I think the writing was on the wall for a while. So 22 years ago, I was an international student from France to the US. Did okay academically, but struggled financially through school, took a bunch of odd jobs, and ultimately pulled through with the help of my family and the little income I was making from the different jobs. I was an indoor soccer referee, a grader, a tutor for math, physics, computer science, French, you name it. But that was sort of the first seed in my head. Like, why was it so hard financially to get through school? Why weren't banks lending to me as an international student? And then the reason I say I'm dual is it kept being a theme. It was sort of like, the signs were like coming, getting thrown at me, and I was just sort of not seeing them. So I worked at Capital One after graduation. I was really passionate about consumer finance, worked in tech in Boston. And in the meantime, I had countless friends either drop out of school or not able to come in the first place. And then I financed my younger sister about a decade after I went to university in the US. And what shocked me at the time is it was the same problem all over again. If, as big brother, I hadn't been there to help her finance her education, there's no other solution for international students. And the straw that broke the camel's back is about 8 years ago, when I was working at McKinsey at the time. I was in Western Africa on this really exciting sort of financial inclusion macro project, working for the government there. And I get an email in my inbox. And this email is coming from a current student at UVA, my alma mater. And the student sent it to me and a few other alumni. We're part of the same Latino service organization in college. And the student said the following. He said, "Hey guys, I'm $500 short on my rent this month. I'm going to get evicted, and I'm thinking about dropping out of school." And that was the aha moment for me, because I sent him the money. But I thought, okay, well, management consulting allows me to help one student like that with $500, but I don't get paid enough to solve sort of this macro societal issue, and it really resonated. This is sort of the dull part of me is like, the writing has been on the wall this whole time. It's sort of this repeated issue, either for me directly or my family or my circle of friends. And I thought, well, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And then I thought, well, why am I not doing anything about this? And I couldn't get the idea out of my head. And even though I was happily sort of on the partner path in management consulting, doing really interesting work in financial inclusion, this was just too gripping for me to let go. And so I decided to leave everything behind and create a company that would essentially solve this lack of financial access to higher education for international students. And that was fascinating.
That was it. It was great. So quick aside before we get into a little more meat there on the students that are being serviced by MPOWER and enabled to attend university. Were you married at the time when you decided to pull the ripcord on the big career and jump, feet first into MPOWER? How was that conversation, if you were?
Yeah, it's funny because I had what made it worse is so as part of, maybe this is too much detail, but as part of sort of me deciding to leave McKinsey and do this, as sort of a condition for my departure, I sort of had a condition for continuing to get paid for a couple of months at McKinsey as sort of this transition period. I had to look for a job, and so I had to interview, and I got job offers that were extremely lucrative. And so it wasn't even sort of deciding to get $0 in salary for, it was almost a year and a half, but it was $0 versus, not even versus what I was making, versus what I could make in these other places. And being an immigrant to the U.S. and the son of maybe slightly more risk-averse parents, although they took their fair of challenges in life, it was the toughest conversation was for me to actually tell my parents, "Hey, mom and dad, I know you've been able to rely on me occasionally to help with my younger sister or other things, but I've decided to take zero money for the foreseeable future and take this huge career risk." And it sounds weird to say luckily at the time I wasn't married, but in a way it was lucky, because I think that and maybe privileged also. I didn't have children that depended on me or a spouse I didn't have a whole lot of financial responsibilities outside of being able to feed myself. But yeah, it certainly was taking a huge leap forward. But again, I think it takes an element of like foolishness and just sort of risk appetite to dive in.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and this kind of will link very nicely into our next topic and talking about the students. But I think one of the things that's as an entrepreneur myself, and as somebody who talks to a lot of entrepreneurs and interviews them on the show and does a lot of mentoring, you are always going to have more opportunity, right? This is not your one opportunity. The fact that you are a highly paid and highly successful person on a partner path at McKinsey and we're getting other job offers, that type of thing will still be there with you if you decide, if for some reason that the entrepreneurial venture didn't flamed out or something like that, as long as you didn't burn all your bridges and just like along the way, right? As long as you're a good citizen, if you will, leaving your prior company and when you started and you maintain your network, you're probably going to be okay. And so a lot of times our worst case scenario risk brain, I always call it the 3 o'clock in the morning brain. You wake up, you're petrified. You're like, I'm going to be homeless. I'm not going to have any food to eat. It's all that type of stuff. So the connection, I like this because you had to have an element of understanding risk and having a little bit of adventure and pursuit of something more on so many stages of your life, right? Deciding to leave your home to come to the United States to go to school, leave family behind. That's not easy, right? I mean, heck, I just moved to Austin, Texas from Boston, and it was difficult to kind of like, we have children and
different worlds,
grandchildren. Yeah, it's different, right? You know what I mean? Like that's hard enough. So, going across an ocean and not having, to be able to fly back and forth every weekend or anything like that, it's going to be very difficult. So for many of these students that they're going to the United States and it might be years before they're back or what have you. So there's a lot of courage there. So I want to talk about like why these students are worthy investments, why we should be thinking about investing in these folks. Because I went to Boston University. You mentioned you spent some time out there. One of the reasons why I chose the MBA program at Boston University was because of the diversity. About half of the student body at the Graduate School of Business, Management School, they're international, which is really cool for somebody who wasn't international. It's like, yeah, I'm going to be able to network and have friends and people in my cohort that are from around the world. This is going to be really exciting stuff. And many of them, the ones that I encountered at least, were from very affluent families, right? So money was not an issue. They were, they're here. Sometimes you wonder, like, why are you even going to graduate school? Your parents are like loaded, dude. But part of it was they were going to go back and work in the business or whatever. But many, many more, however, were not from affluent families, right? They were, as you described, they're here and they have a purpose. They may have some scholarship or whatever. They're obviously academically qualified to attend the school. So they're bright minds, but finances are thin and difficult. Why are these folks, the ones who need financing solutions, so worthy of investing in? What makes them special?
Yeah, and I love that you talk about it as an investment because I think that's exactly what it is, right? It's very different than a consumer loan to buy a TV or for another purpose. This is really someone who's investing in her future and her career and her personal development and growth. And so, one quick thing maybe on the international student profile, I think there's sort of this myth that international students are wealthy, and that's due to two sort of cognitive biases. One is a selection bias. The ones that make it to the US have to prove that they have a year's worth of their financials covered, meaning 1 year worth of tuition, housing, and other living expenses to even get the visa to come to North America. And so you don't see all the ones that got accepted or the ones that wanted to come, but were like, I'm just never going to have that money in my bank account in rupees or reais or rubles, just to pick currencies with ours. And so I can't come. So that's the selection bias. And then the second one is the availability bias. So you might notice the shiny red sports car from the Saudi student in the parking lot for the business school. What you don't realize is there's another 99 students at that same school that either have a beat up Honda Civic not to pick on Honda Civics, but or don't have a car at all, right? And are walking, taking the bus, etc., and are just not living at that sort of same level of lifestyle. And so I would say the great majority of international students are not wealthy. And even when they are, there's a big difference between being sort of like rupee wealthy or wealthy in reais in your home country versus being dollar wealthy. And it's generally a sticker shock when they realize how much rent can cost in places like Boston in particular. And it's just a very big adjustment. But I didn't actually answer your question around why are they a worthy investment. I think it goes back to your earlier point. It's if someone is willing to leave everything behind, family, sort of comfort of their home and culture, and go thousands of miles away sometimes to spend a year or 2 or 3 or 4 investing in themselves and learning and challenging themselves in what is often not their first language. And by the way, spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on that education, which converted into their home country currency could have meant a home and a car and what have you. That is an extremely strong signal of that person's discipline, commitment to growth and excellence, sort of diligence, career potential, and so on. Not even to mention the selection aspect that the school goes through to validate that, yes, Mike has the grades. Mike, by the way, a super international name. Mike has the grades or the test scores and sort of the pedigree and years of experience that will make him successful after this MBA or this graduate program.
Yeah. I it's before we tee off on my name, which is, but it's really, it is true though. You meet people who have had to work a little harder to get what we as Americans kind of almost take for granted, right? That, hey, I'm going to be able to get into college. I mean, look, I have 2 children. My son is a junior in high school. We talk about college all the time. It's like the biggest topic for him right now. And he's an AB student. He's a really good student. He's a smart kid. He's got some interests that he's thinking about pursuing, which is awesome. But every once in a while, a little bit, he kind of, gets a little nervous about the whole process. I'm like, buddy, there's no chance that you don't get to go to college, right? So now it's all about like making sure you do the things or studying for the test or whatever to make sure that you have the choice that works for you, right? And the choice that works for you might not be the same for one of your peers or whatever. Not everybody has to go to Ivy League. You can go to a state school if has the programs that you're interested in and all that type of stuff. So we take for granted that type of stuff. But man, I've met so many people who have had to bust their butts to get here and to make it happen. And it's no wonder that many of the most successful entrepreneurs that we have in America and some of the most successful executives are people who are first generation immigrants, right? They just come here, they invest, and then who knows what they do when they go back home, right? Some of them will go back home and instead of staying in the States, and it's absolutely fantastic and spectacular. Quick aside, by the way, on Mike name, it is an international name. Come on, every culture has a version of Mike. We have Miguel, we have Misha, we have.
You're right. You're totally right. Yeah.
It's one of the original names. Come on, it's Michael. No, it is funny. Like trying to figure like how do you say my name in a different language? That's kind of fun. Anyway. All right. I want to talk a little bit about your journey in a little more depth because you are absolutely. You're just a shining example. It's like you're a walking, talking example of how these students is referred to. Your aha moment started way back when. You mentioned that you had a stint as an indoor soccer ref while you were in college. And I want to talk about some of the lessons you learned there because first of all, I loved it. I thought it was great. And as both my kids play basketball, I spend an amazing amount of time in basketball gyms. And poor refs, man, they get beat up like by the crowd, by the players, by the coach. It's like just a really rough job. And when you mentioned that you did a stint as an indoor soccer ref during college, I was reminded of Chris Sacca. And for those who are unaware of Chris Sacca, he's like kind of at this point in time, legendary venture capitalist. But I was fortunate enough to meet him before he was legendary Chris Sacca, and he was an investor in Twitter. And we met and chatted at a couple of different events and that type of stuff. But he's gone on to be quite a vocal kind of leader talking about what you should look for to invest in companies for a successful entrepreneur and so forth. And one of the things that he says is that he only invests in startups where the founder has had shitty jobs. Just like, you have to work like, and I think I would qualify. I've worked at gas stations. I've been a janitor. I've done, while I was in college, I was, mopping floors in the student center and all that type of stuff. So I've had them, but I think your job is rougher. I honestly do think being a ref is a lot rougher. So how do you think being a ref shaped you as a person, but also as a business leader? Because I really do think there's something to glean in there.
And by the way, I've had a sort of more challenging or even sort of lower on the totem pole, if you will, jobs than being a ref. I can talk about that briefly afterwards. Also, funny stories. Sure. But being an actually indoor soccer referee was even worse than outdoor. And part of it was that I was terrible at it. And part of it is indoor soccer referee is a lot more like cage fighting than it is about indoor soccer is a lot more about cage fighting than it is about soccer. Like you have typically all these dudes in a very small field. It's totally fair to like play against the wall, which some people interpret as like elbowing other players in the face against the wall. And so refereeing that is a little intense. And here I was, sort of this shy 19-year-old, and for whatever reason in the co-ed league, all these what felt like really more mature, older MBA players or graduate students were enrolling from, and it was just, I think they were reliving the Champions League in their head while they were playing co-ed, and I was just terrible. I lacked in assertiveness. I really struggled with some of the calls I was making, and so a few things it taught me. One, it taught me a lot of different insults in Spanish, usually thrown at me. Secondly, it taught me a lot of sort of being very present. Like you can't snooze for a second when you're a referee. You really got to be there. Assertiveness, again, you can't be shy when you're a referee. Like you have to be the alpha person on the field. And you also, and this is sort of the last one, is you're going to make bad calls, right? Like it's always sort of a gray area. And certainly we didn't have the video replays at the time. So some of the calls, like you just got to make them and you got to own them. And so I learned all of that, and at the end of an hour of that work, I was making $4.25. So I also learned the value of hard work for little money, and what sadly a lot of Americans have to go through. I was lucky enough that this is a job while in college, but a lot of people around the country, that's their wage. Yeah. So I think it taught me a lot, but funny other story about sort of humbling jobs that I had early on. So first year back from UVA over the summer, one of my friends was a fellow European guy who was like, hey, let's go around Europe. Let's visit different countries. And so I'm like, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to go around Europe. And they're like, well, that's great. Except you're not the son of a diplomat, so you're going to have to make some money. And I was like, well, and in France, you typically can't work until the age of 18. So I hadn't, up until that time, outside of my campus job, I hadn't really worked in France. And so I signed up at a local temp agency, and I tell them, hey, I'm like enrolled in this great university in the US, and I want to work this summer. And they're like, great, we got just the right job for you. And the job was at a paint powder company, cleaning what they, and I can't even make this up, officially called their toilet, which was all the gooey sort of paint trash went all in this one little room. And essentially for about a week, my job consisted in wearing a mask and everything and just shoveling all that into like some wheelbarrow and carrying it away. But again, at the time I thought I was making massive amounts of money because I could pay for parts of my trip to Europe. And then after that, because these were temp jobs, I had another one where I was essentially doing a night shift at some factory where I was carrying around cardboard. And there's sort of cardboard waste across the factory, and I had to take it and put it in one place. So clearly I was putting my computer science degree to work. But it was, I think it was very formative in a way. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, then I had a third shift back at the initial factory and I got fired. I wasn't doing too well in terms of I wasn't carrying the bags of paint fast enough, or I can't remember exactly. So all in all, I think, yeah, these are really formative experiences. You get an appreciation for what people do day to day, the amount of privilege I had to be studying computer science and to have a job where I wasn't going to have consequences of like being in an environment where like there's chemicals all around you. I remember even after 3 days at that paint factory, I was still, when I was sneezing, there's still some of that paint powder coming out days later. So anyway, sorry, it was a long answer, but
no, I love it. I love
memories.
it. I ask these questions because this show is as much about shining a light on the startup as it is learning from the founder, right? These journey stories are, I think they're so important for either would-be founders or current founders who are going through the journey to be reminded of, hey, you've been through some challenges before. You've had the hard jobs. You've had the picking paint powder out of your nose. I had a job where I worked construction, building senior apartments at Brandeis University in Rhode Island there when I lived up. And exactly what you said, at the end of the day, all the sheetrock dust for the wall, like rocks coming out of your nose because it's just disgusting, right? So we've had some of those jobs, and it doesn't mean you have to have the dirty, grimy jobs. I think you have to have, as you say, the low on the totem pole job, the job that puts you in a situation where you realize, hey, I can survive this. I can get through this. I can, and I've achieved more since then. That's another piece for me. I don't know about how you interpret it, but like I've leveled up many times before, right? And knowing that you can level up from where you're at, even though when you're probably times when I was sweeping floors or pumping gas, I was like, this sucks, right? But at least, I knew there was something more to it. So I just think that's so powerful. By the way, I think it helps you as a leader too, right? Because you're going to have people on your team, and I'm going to dive into this a little bit more. You're going to have people on the team who are coming in the low rung, and you can encourage them to like, hey, listen, you won't always be on the bottom rung, right? You're going to have place, and it kind of speaks to the mission of the company as well. Let's shift gears a little bit to like your other experiences. So you had the low end, the harder, like gritty type deal. And then you had what a lot of folks, frankly, and especially a lot of college students, a lot of the people who are in your program are probably like, if I could be a McKinsey consultant like Manu, my life would be amazeballs, right? Like, so how have you adjusted, like the big lessons you learned from McKinsey and then had to adjust them to, leading MPOWER?
It's different worlds, and it's so funny because I think it's a fascinating topic. Like there's a lot more, I think, that meets the eye in terms of what's applicable from management consulting over to entrepreneurship, and there's a lot I had to unlearn. And by the way, side note on sort of the glorious McKinsey days, I think it was in 2012, I spent over 200 nights in SPG, so at Marriott Bonvoy hotels, primarily overseas, to the point where I had an assigned concierge and they sent me a bathrobe with my initials on it. And I think that should be the sign for anyone that when you get that gift, like it's time to switch jobs or to like rebalance your life. You're spending too much time away from home and away from reality. But so that's sort of this sort of gilded image of consulting. I think I learned some incredible skills. One is you're always operating with a sense of urgency in consulting. Like you create your own sort of deadlines. I mean, the client wants usually an answer within 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, etc. And you sort of like one up that internally, and so you're always sort of in a race to gather data, do analyses, align various stakeholders, and then deliver a project or a product, etc. And so that's incredibly useful in the startup world because again, you're creating your own company, and there's no one telling you, well, you have to meet this deadline by this time. Most of the time, it's you have to be sort of self-driven and create that sense of urgency for yourself and the company. The other sort of applicable tool, maybe related to that, is 80/20, right? When you have that kind of timeline, you can't go out and boil the ocean and try to gather all the data under the sun. Like you have to have some strong hypotheses and move forward with that and either prove them or disprove them. If you disprove, you take another avenue. And I think the same is true around how you come up with a product and iterate on that product in a startup. And then ultimately managing a team, so a small team, being nimble, etc. All things are applicable. Now here's Here's what I had to unlearn from consulting. I thought I knew how to manage people, right? And I knew how to manage a small team in some ways, and some of these things carry over. But I was managing a small team of Harvard Business School graduates or people who went to MIT Sloan or to Stanford. And when you call these people on a Sunday evening and you tell them, hey, I'm going to need you to work halfway through the night because we have this new sort of meeting with this sort of second in command client tomorrow morning, the response from that person is like, yes, I'm so excited. I've anticipated your call. I have 15 slides ready, and I'll have the next batch ready in the next 3 hours. Let's have a check-in call at 3 a.m. Right? That's what you hear. Sort of like, jump. Oh, can I jump from even higher? And by the way, when you sort of like make that ask, usually they come back with something even better than what you had anticipated. Right. So that's sort of like not real world management. Real world management came to me in the form of like we had a customer relations analyst in our DC office in the early days, and that person was not happy. We used to have a check-in time at 8 a.m., a checkout at 6 p.m., and that person wasn't happy with a checkout time at 6, and we didn't have a conversation about it. It was sort of like on a Friday. At that checkout, she was like, well, this is my last day. Goodbye, everyone. Just like walked out in the middle of the call with the team. And I'd never been exposed to that. And I was like, I wasn't even sure what to do, how to react, etc. And I said, well, real world management is dealing with people who have emotions, who don't always sort of have the polish to express what those emotions are, or to realize that it's a two-way conversation. And vice versa. On my side, what could I have done differently to like be more in tune with what this person was feeling? What were her needs on a day-to-day basis? And so, so very, very different management around managing real humans, and then managing different timelines and different expectations.
That's really fascinating. And I also think that I'm not sure what you don't have to give too many details or any details at all, but I also think we're in a shifting environment for maybe it's what I've been taught, or maybe it's just the generation that I'm from, where there was always a you give 2 weeks notice type of thing, and unless it's like an absurd thing and you quit on the spot or whatever, you always thought it was going to be a black spot on your career if you, God forbid, you didn't give 2 weeks notice, right? But people are becoming more and more comfortable because they're like, hey, listen, the company wouldn't give me 2 weeks notice if they just decided to lay me off today. They'd be just like, see you later, Mike, right? Today's your last day. Pack up your stuff. Thank you for working here. And maybe there's some severance or not. And so I think some employees are like, hey, you know what? As soon as this place doesn't look awesome anymore, or there's some place that looks shinier and nicer, I'm out. And in startup world, this must be, for you as the founder, particularly, important or top of mind, because, a lot of these folks could be making more somewhere else if they were at a more established firm, right? They are in many cases choosing to work in a startup because they believe in the mission. They're taking a lower salary with the hope that the equity that they're being granted will be worth a lot more. So they're like, this is going to be great. I might make a lot more here if this thing's successful. And so I always talk about if somebody's joining a startup, I always tell them, hey, listen, this is a short-term thing. Like, it's either going to be awesome and you're going to know really quick, or it's going to be the opposite, and you're going to know relatively quick. And if it turns out to be awesome and it's a rocket ship, you can ride it for however long you want to, but you'll know within a couple of years or whatever. How do you had the luxury at a McKinsey of being able to recruit the best and the brightest with the promise of lots of money, and many of the people you knew were already in their brain already said, I wanted to work for one of the top tier consulting companies. Like, they already knew they wanted you, if you will, right? So it's really not that difficult for you to. How do you go about recruiting? Because, as an early stage company who has a mission-based focus, I mean, you are a for-profit entity, but there's a heavy mission base. How do you go about attracting high quality folks to the firm?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think every day we learn more on that. We're really excited with the team we have in place, and I think we look for a few criteria. First and foremost, I think the mission fit has to be there, meaning they need to be passionate about the cause we're serving. if they don't have the empathy for the students, either because they've been in those shoes or they have friends who've been in those shoes, or they relate somehow to the socioeconomic struggle, they're not going to be motivated every day to come and make a difference at sort of the pace that we're moving at internally at MPOWER. But what we find is people are motivated by many different things, and it's not like a 0 or 1. It's sort of like on a spectrum for different things. So people relate to the mission on a spectrum. Some people like never worked outside of like microfinance in sub-Saharan Africa, and and that's really what attracted them to MPOWER. Other people relate to the intellectual challenge of really solving cross-border consumer finance. And they've worked in consumer finance or financial services before, and just intellectually they're fascinated by this, and they like making a difference for the student, but that's secondary to the intellectual challenge. Other people just love being in a growth company and sort of the amount of energy that comes with it, and learning from colleagues and having the ability to have sort of different responsibilities. And then, everyone, I think, to a certain degree, is also interested in the financial upside and the impact that we can have in parallel with that. So everyone at MPOWER is a shareholder, and I think, we have competitive salaries. We'll all have sort of financial upside when we IPO someday, and so I think that there's a rally behind that as well. And so, going back to your question about how do we filter, we look at sort of the different dimensions of the passion for the company, the international exposure, and then obviously the intellectual abilities. Can they solve these problems creatively? Do they have that track record as well?
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I love that. That's always just so curious, because I've been in this situation before, like trying to attract high quality people to an organization we're talking a lot of upside here, but there's going to be a lot of challenges too. You have to be very flexible here. And so you're going to have passion be a driver. It can't just be the daily grind job. We're getting ready to kind of head for home here. A couple more quick questions. And these are my fun ones. I always save the funnest ones for last. First one is, what has been something that you didn't see coming for MPOWER, right? You started the company, you probably had some visions. What was something that was like a big surprise? It can be something, a huge challenge, or it could be something that was like, that is fascinating. This is really cool. I didn't see this coming. What would you say some of those things are? It doesn't have to be one, by the way.
I was just going to say, there's two that jump to mind. So one is, we accidentally got into the DACA student market. We didn't see that coming, and candidly, when we founded MPOWER in 2014, I didn't even know what DACA students were. I was ignorant about even that segment of the population. And one day we got an application on our platform, and when underwriting took a look at it, we realized, well, this is someone who's applying with a foreign passport. I forget, it was South Korea or Mexico, and the student was essentially applying as an international student, but had spent the past decade in the U.S., had gone to high school here on their resume, and then even worked, etc. And we said, well, this doesn't really reconcile, because when you're an international student, you can only work on campus. Typically, you haven't come to the U.S. for high school, although if you have, you certainly haven't been here for 10 years. And so when we dug a bit into it, we realized this was a DACA student who was also essentially facing the same challenge international students were. And they were excluded from federal loans because that's just how the federal policy was set up. And oftentimes, because mom and dad for that student were immigrants and didn't necessarily have an established credit history, they couldn't serve as a co-signer for a private loan. So they were also excluded from financing to go to college. And so we jumped with 2 feet forward. We said, how do we better serve this demographic? How do we make them feel more welcome? And so we changed the language on our website, on our brochure. We lowered their pricing to match what we would offer to U.S. citizens as well. And so today we serve more and more DACA students. But it was a complete accident. It wasn't planned. And maybe the other thing that surprised me is when you create a company, and I think Jack Ma said this probably much more eloquently than I will, you sort of, in the first days, it's quote unquote your company, but quickly it's not anymore, and it becomes something much bigger. And very quickly, I became an employee of my company. And I remember this one day a few years back, walking into the office one day, and usually I'm the first one in the office. I wasn't that day. And there was a meeting going on in one room. There's others on the phone in another. And I realized I had no clue what the meeting was about. They were working on some project. And that's when I realized, like, wow, I created something that's much bigger than me. I'm just like this little ant now in this, going back to Jack Ma, great analogy, but like in this is much bigger sort of company that is really out there. And now I'm going to struggle just keeping up with it and how it's evolving and so on. And I don't know, it was sort of like what I imagine parents feel when they have a kid that far surpasses them in many dimensions, and that's sort of what I had that moment. It's like, wow, I'm now the baby within this much bigger entity.
That is absolutely, and that must have just been so amazing for you. Like, you have to take a moment when you saw that, like, this is awesome. This is fantastic. Like, and that is the hope of the company, right? At some point in time, it can live beyond you, that it's, you could move on to whatever, who knows, maybe for the rest of your life, you're always with MPOWER, you're serving as a chairman when you're like 90, who knows? But chances are, the way entrepreneurs are wired, there will be another problem, another thing, an opportunity you want to pursue. And it's just nice to know that you're building this thing that can live without you. That's fantastic. Okay, now for my last and my favorite question of all. What is your ask of the listeners? Everybody who comes on this show or anybody who attends our event and gets to speak on stage has to have something they want from the audience, right? It could be anything. They help with recruiting needs, or help with, you want to be introduced to certain types of people or whatever. What is your ask of the people who are listening and or watching the show?
So I guess 3 words. Spread the word. So it's we're recruiting massively, and so is every company in America today. So the war for talent is real, and I think I talked a little bit about sort of the benefits of working with a fast-growing company like MPOWER, and the fun of our culture. So that's one. We have all these jobs open on our website, empowerfinancing.com/careers. The other one is spread the word about our refinancing product. So very recently, we launched a product that allows young immigrant professionals in the US who took a loan either in North America for their studies or in their home country, whether that's India, Brazil, West in Nigeria, or what have you. They borrowed overseas for their studies, but now they're here and they're working for Google, JP Morgan, you name it. And each month they have to painfully send money back in local currency, pay crazy transaction fees, and they get zero upside in terms of credit building or tax benefits and so on. Well, we can refinance that home country loan in US dollars. We can build the credit history here. We can hopefully save them money, not only in fees, but on their rates. And probably most importantly, we can make their life a lot easier by just setting up auto ACH drafts on a monthly basis. So spread the word about that. Come to our website, check out our refi page. If you have friends who are international and have MBA debt or what have you, send them our way. So that's it. Spread the word.
Perfect. We'll make sure we get all those links in the show notes. And if awesome. People are watching, they've probably seen some of the screen capture that's been going by and so forth. So, well, Manu, this has been fantastic. I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoy every guest that I have on, but this was awesome. I loved it. It was fantastic.
But I'm special.
You were
best
special.
Looking one.
Yeah,
exactly.
The best looking one. We had a lot in common. It was fantastic. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the SoFin podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to my man, Manu Smadja, CEO, founder of MPOWER Financing. It was fantastic having him on the show. As you know from previous episodes, I just have a really strong affinity for immigrant entrepreneurs. I just love the story. MPOWER just really resonated with me, and I have a feeling that they are going to empower many immigrant students to become entrepreneurs eventually, right? Just that hunger, as you heard Manu talk about, that is just implicit in somebody who kind of risks it all, leaves their home country to come here to get educated in some of the best schools in the world, and then they're going to do some fabulous stuff after that. So awesome stuff. As always, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on, you will find us. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a guest or a topic for the show, hook me up. I'm at Mike Langford basically everywhere. Love to hear from you with your FinTech founder stories, and let's get them on this show, okay? Hope you're staying safe, and be nice to each other. We need it. We'll see you next time on the SoFin podcast. See ya. Bye.